Esteem. Let's start with what happens the moment a narcissist feels powerless. And I want you to really sit with this because if you've lived through it, esteem, you've felt it in your nervous system before you ever had language for it. When they begin to lose control, they don't shrink. They don't step back. They don't reflect. They escalate, esteem. And that escalation can feel shocking. It might begin subtly, a sharper tone, a sudden criticism, a random argument that makes no sense, a small jab that feels disproportionate to the moment, esteem. But what you are witnessing isn't random irritability. It's panic dressed up as dominance. Powerlessness to a narcissistic person is not uncomfortable. It is intolerable, esteem. It threatens the entire architecture of who they believe themselves to be. Their identity is built on control, superiority, admiration, and influence. When any of that wobbles, esteem, their internal world starts to crack. And instead of sitting with that crack, instead of asking, why am I so triggered right now? They create chaos, because chaos restores hierarchy. Esteem, think about it. If they can throw you off balance, if they can get you confused, if they can provoke you into defending yourself, esteem, they've shifted the focus away from their insecurity and onto your reaction. Now you're explaining. Now you're anxious. Now you're scrambling to fix something. And in that scramble, esteem, they feel steady again. I have seen this happen when a partner starts setting boundaries. Suddenly, arguments multiply. Old issues are resurrected. Esteem. You've changed. You're selfish. You don't care about this relationship anymore. The content of the fight isn't the point. The destabilization is. Or maybe it happens when you succeed. Esteem. You get a promotion. You gain confidence. You build friendships outside of them. Instead of celebration, you're met with irritation, criticism, or a manufactured crisis. Esteem. Something goes wrong right when you're shining. That's not coincidence. Your growth represents a shift in power. And when they feel that shift, they escalate to rebalance the scales. Esteem escalation can look loud, yelling threats, dramatic ultimatums, slamming doors, but it can also look quiet and strategic, silent treatment, withholding affection, emotional withdrawal, esteem, suddenly becoming too busy. These are not mature responses to conflict. These are tactics designed to make you feel uncertain. Uncertainty is fertile ground for control, esteem, because when you're uncertain, you start scanning for clues. You ask, what did I do? You try to decode their mood. You adjust yourself. You walk more carefully. You soften your tone, esteem. You apologize even when you're not sure why. And every one of those adjustments feeds their sense of regained authority. What's crucial to understand is that this escalation is not strength, esteem. It is dysregulation. It is a nervous system that cannot tolerate vulnerability. But because vulnerability feels like annihilation to them, they replace it with intimidation, esteem. Some of you have described this experience as feeling like emotional whiplash. One day things are calm. The next day you're in a storm and you don't even know what triggered it, esteem. That unpredictability isn't accidental. Intermittent reinforcement is powerful. It keeps you hooked. It keeps you trying harder. And when you try harder, they feel powerful again. Esteem, sometimes escalation goes beyond arguments and into full-blown chaos creation. They may create financial stress, stir up family drama, pick fights in public, esteem, or provoke you into reacting in ways that make you look unstable. When they feel small inside, they make the environment big and explosive. It's important to say this clearly, esteem. Their escalation is not proof that you are doing something wrong. It is often proof that you are doing something right. You may have started saying no. You may have stopped over-explaining, esteem. You may have withdrawn from the emotional tug of war. And in that withdrawal, they feel the loss of control. And so they turn up the volume, esteem. There's also something deeply confusing about this stage, because sometimes when they escalate, they'll accuse you of being the one who is out of control. They'll say, esteem, why are you so dramatic? After they've just created a scene. They'll claim you're unstable, overly sensitive, selfish, or cruel, esteem. Projection is a fast way to deflect the unbearable feeling of powerlessness. If they can convince themselves that you are the problem, they don't have to confront their own insecurity, esteem. But here's what I want you to really hear. When someone cannot tolerate losing control, they will create conflict rather than experience vulnerability. That's the core of it, esteem. Healthy people can feel disappointed, insecure, even jealous and talk about it. They can say, esteem, I'm feeling left out, or I'm scared of losing you, or I'm struggling with this change. That takes emotional maturity. Escalation is what happens when that maturity isn't there, esteem. And for those of you who have endured this, your body learned it before your mind did. You learn to anticipate storms. You learn to monitor tone shifts, esteem. You learn to predict when something small might turn into something massive. Living in that state is exhausting. It creates hypervigilance, esteem. It teaches your nervous system that safety is conditional and temporary. That's why breaking free from this dynamic isn't just about leaving a person. Esteem, it's about recalibrating your sense of calm. Because when you stop participating in the chaos, something remarkable happens. At first, they may escalate even more. Esteem. This is often called an extinction burst. When a behavior that used to work stops working, it intensifies temporarily. If yelling used to get a reaction and now it doesn't, esteem, they may yell louder. If guilt used to pull you back in and now it doesn't, they may cry harder or threaten more dramatically. It can feel frightening. Esteem. But that escalation is often a sign that the old control mechanisms are failing. And this is where your clarity matters. If you misinterpret escalation as evidence that you need to fix things, esteem, you'll re-enter the cycle. If you interpret it as what it is, a last attempt to regain power, you can stay grounded. That grounding might look like not engaging in circular arguments. Esteem. It might look like leaving the room. It might look like not responding to baiting texts. It might look like documenting instead of debating. And every time you refuse to step into the chaos, esteem, you reclaim a piece of your power. Some of you may be thinking, but what if the escalation becomes dangerous? And that's an important question. Escalation can cross into emotional abuse, esteem, verbal abuse, sometimes even physical intimidation. Safety planning becomes critical in those situations. This isn't about tolerating harm, esteem. It's about recognizing patterns so you can protect yourself. The key insight here is that escalation is reactive. It is not a sign of dominance. It is a sign of fragility, esteem. And once you see it that way, something shifts internally. Instead of thinking, they're so powerful, you begin to see, they're terrified of losing control, esteem. That doesn't excuse the behavior. It doesn't minimize the damage, but it reframes it. It moves you out of self-blame. Because for so long, esteem, many of you have internalized the chaos as your fault. You've thought, esteem, if I were calmer, if I were kinder, if I explained better, if I didn't push back, then maybe the explosions wouldn't happen. But the explosions are not about your delivery, esteem. They are about their inability to tolerate powerlessness. And here is the deeper truth: the more regulated you become, the more dysregulated they may appear. When you stop yelling back, esteem, their yelling feels louder. When you stop chasing, their silence feels colder. When you stop defending, their accusations feel more absurd. That contrast can be unsettling, esteem. But it is also revealing, because you begin to see that the chaos was never mutual. It was generated, esteem. Breaking free begins the moment you recognize that you do not have to absorb someone else's panic disguised as power. You do not have to dance faster because someone else feels insecure, esteem. You do not have to shrink because someone else fears losing influence. You do not have to accept storms as the price of connection. And the more you anchor into that understanding, esteem, the less effective escalation becomes. They may try louder tactics, they may try sharper words, they may attempt to provoke you with old vulnerabilities. But if you hold steady, esteem, if you respond instead of react, if you choose disengagement over drama, the dynamic begins to collapse. Because chaos only works when two people participate. When one person steps out, esteem, the storm has nowhere to land. And that is when something extraordinary happens. You realize that what once felt overpowering was actually a cycle sustained by your empathy, your fear, esteem, and your hope. When you reclaim those parts of yourself, when you give your empathy to yourself, when you release the fear, when you place hope in your own growth instead of their change, esteem, their escalation loses its fuel. So if you are in that phase right now, if things feel more chaotic because you've started setting boundaries, don't mistake the noise for failure, esteem. Now, after the chaos, after the escalation, after the emotional storms that seem to come out of nowhere, there is another maneuver that often follows when a narcissistic person feels powerless, esteem. And this one can be even more destabilizing because it doesn't look loud, it looks subtle. It looks confusing. It looks like conversation. They rewrite the narrative, esteem. When control begins to slip, they don't just try to overpower the moment, they try to control the story of the moment. And this is where many of you started doubting your own mind. Esteem. You remember what was said, you remember how it felt, you remember the sequence of events. But suddenly, in the retelling, it's different. Not slightly different, fundamentally different. Esteem. That's not what I meant. That's not remembering it wrong. You're too sensitive. You always twist things. And slowly, esteem, the ground under your feet begins to feel less solid. Narrative control is psychological power. If they can control the version of reality that gets accepted, they regain authority, esteem. And when they feel powerless, this becomes urgent. Let's talk about why this happens. A narcissistic person often constructs a very carefully curated self-image. They are the reasonable one, esteem, the generous one, the misunderstood one, the victim of unfair treatment, the superior one, the stable one. That image must remain intact at all costs. When something threatens that image, esteem, perhaps you point out inconsistency, Perhaps you hold them accountable. Perhaps you stop tolerating disrespect. That image cracks. And instead of repairing the crack through accountability, esteem, they repair it through distortion. Rewriting the narrative allows them to avoid shame. Shame is the emotional experience they cannot tolerate. Not guilt. Guilt says, esteem, I did something wrong. Shame says, there is something wrong with me. For someone with fragile self-structure, that feeling can feel annihilating, so they change the story. Esteem, maybe they insulted you. But now they say they were joking. Maybe they promised something and didn't follow through. Now they say you misunderstood. Maybe they exploded in anger. Esteem. Now they say you provoked them. Maybe they were dismissive of your feelings. Now they claim they were just being logical. You start to question yourself. And that questioning is not weakness. Esteem. It is the predictable outcome of prolonged gaslighting. Gaslighting is not simply lying, it is the systematic undermining of someone's perception. Esteem. It's when your lived experience gets repeatedly contradicted until you begin to rely on the other person to define reality. When a narcissistic person feels powerful, esteem, they may not need to gaslight as intensely. But when they feel powerless, when they sense you pulling away, when they sense exposure, the rewriting intensifies. Esteem. Because if they cannot control you directly, they will control how events are interpreted. Think about how destabilizing this is. You enter a conversation hoping for resolution. You say, esteem, when you said that, it hurt me. And instead of hearing, you are met with revision. I never said that. You're exaggerating. You always make things dramatic. Esteem. Now the conversation isn't about the hurt. It's about whether the hurt is even valid. This is how power gets reclaimed. Esteem. If they can move the discussion away from accountability and into confusion, they're back in control. Many of you have described keeping screenshots, saving emails, esteem, replaying conversations in your mind to make sure you're not imagining things. That hyper-documentation is often a trauma response to chronic narrative distortion. Esteem. You're trying to anchor yourself in something concrete. But here's the painful truth: even when you have proof, they may still deny. Even when confronted with evidence, esteem, they may reinterpret it. That's taken out of context. You're not seeing the bigger picture. You're obsessed. At some point, you realize that facts are not the issue, esteem. The issue is power. Controlling the narrative is more important to them than aligning with reality. And this doesn't just happen in private, esteem. When narcissistic individuals feel exposed or powerless, they may begin shaping the story publicly. They present themselves as misunderstood. They hint that you're unstable, esteem. They portray themselves as the one trying to fix things. You may feel blindsided when others repeat back to you a version of events that feels unrecognizable. Esteem. That's narrative management at work. It's important to understand that this rewriting isn't always consciously malicious. Esteem. Sometimes it is so deeply defensive that they genuinely reshape memories to protect their self-image. The human mind is capable of incredible distortion when shame is involved. Esteem. But whether conscious or unconscious, the impact on you is the same: disorientation. And disoriented people are easier to control. When you no longer trust your perception, esteem, you seek external validation, often from the very person distorting you. Did that really happen? Am I being unfair? Maybe I am too sensitive. And in that seeking, esteem, the hierarchy is restored. They become the authority again. This is why reclaiming your narrative is such a critical step in breaking free. Esteem. Reclaiming your narrative does not mean arguing louder. It does not mean proving your case endlessly. It means internally affirming your experience without needing their agreement. Esteem. It means saying to yourself, I know what I felt. It means recognizing that disagreement about interpretation does not erase emotional impact. Esteem. It means understanding that someone refusing to validate your experience does not invalidate it. When you stop chasing their version of events and start anchoring into your own perception, esteem, something powerful shifts. The rewriting loses its grip. And let's talk about the emotional toll of living inside someone else's revisionist history. Over time, it erodes confidence. Esteem, it erodes intuition. It erodes decisiveness. You become hesitant. You over-explain. You cushion your language. You preface everything with disclaimers. Maybe I'm wrong, but I could be overthinking. I don't want to upset you. Those disclaimers are survival strategies, but they also reveal how deeply the narrative control has penetrated. Esteem. Healthy relationships allow for different perspectives without erasing reality. Two people can remember an event differently and still validate each other's feelings. Esteem. But in narcissistic dynamics, difference becomes denial, and denial becomes dominance. If they admit your perspective has validity, they lose ground. So they refuse the ground entirely. Esteem. When you begin setting boundaries, this rewriting may intensify. You might say, I need space. And suddenly, the story becomes, you're abandoning me. You might say, esteem, I won't tolerate being spoken to that way. And suddenly, the narrative becomes, You're controlling and rigid. Notice how quickly your boundary becomes their victimhood. Esteem. That flip is strategic, because if they can cast themselves as injured, your boundary feels cruel. And when your boundary feels cruel, you're tempted to retract it. Again, power is restored, esteem. But here's what I want you to understand at a deep level: someone rewriting events does not mean your memory is defective. It often means their ego is threatened, esteem. There is a difference between two people genuinely misremembering and one person consistently shifting facts to avoid responsibility. Patterns matter, esteem. If every conflict ends with you apologizing for something you're not sure you did, that's not mutual misunderstanding. That's imbalance, esteem. If every conversation about your hurt turns into a discussion about your tone, your timing, your sensitivity, your delivery, that's deflection. And when you recognize the pattern, esteem, you can step out of the trap. Stepping out may look like refusing to debate what you know happened. It may look like saying, "We remember this differently," and leaving it there, esteem. It may look like journaling immediately after interactions to ground yourself in your own perception. It may look like seeking outside perspective, therapy, trusted friends, support groups, esteem, not to validate anger, but to recalibrate reality. Because once narrative control has taken hold, isolation strengthens it. Breaking free requires reclaiming authorship of your own experience, esteem. And I want to be very clear about something: reclaiming your narrative is not about winning arguments. It's about protecting your psychological integrity, esteem. When you no longer need them to agree with your version of events, their ability to destabilize you decreases. They may still attempt revision, they may still deny, but it lands differently, esteem. Instead of spiraling into self-doubt, you think, "This is the pattern." Instead of defending endlessly, you disengage. Instead of questioning your sanity, you trust your felt experience, esteem. That shift is quiet, but it is revolutionary, because the moment you trust your perception, you are no longer dependent on their interpretation, esteem. And that is deeply threatening to someone who relies on narrative dominance to feel powerful. When they can't rewrite you, they lose leverage. And here is the irony, esteem. The more you anchor into your truth calmly and without theatrics, the more their distortions reveal themselves. You don't have to shout, you don't have to convince. You simply hold steady, esteem. Over time, you may notice something else. Without your participation in the narrative tug of war, their distortions become more exaggerated, more obvious, more desperate, esteem. And that clarity can be painful, but it is freeing, because now you see the mechanism. You see that the rewriting was never about misunderstanding, esteem. It was about maintaining control when control felt threatened. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. So if you are in that space right now, if you are doubting your memory, esteem. If you are replaying conversations at 2 a.m., if you are wondering whether you are the problem, pause. Ask yourself, is this a pattern of distortion when accountability is requested, esteem? If the answer is yes, then what you are witnessing is not confusion. It is a defense against powerlessness. And your job is not to correct their version of reality, esteem. Your job is to remain rooted in your own. Because the person who controls the story may feel powerful for a moment, but the person who trusts their own experience holds the real power, esteem. And no one gets to rewrite your truth but you. Let's move into what often follows narrative distortion, and this one is especially painful because it takes the battle out into the world, esteem. When a narcissist feels powerless, they often move from controlling the private story to controlling the public perception. They launch what many call a smear campaign, esteem. And I want you to hear that carefully, because it is strategic and it is rooted in fear, not strength. Smear campaigns are designed to damage your reputation, your relationships, esteem, your credibility. When a narcissist senses you are gaining autonomy, when they see that your boundaries are firm, or when they feel exposed, they may try to preemptively discredit you, esteem. This is not about justice. This is not about fairness. It is about power. You might notice it first in subtle ways: a casual comment to a mutual friend, a half-truth told to a family member, esteem, a rumor that paints you in a negative light. Sometimes it's very small, almost invisible. Other times it's bold, deliberate, and public, esteem. But every instance is designed to protect their self-image and to undermine your credibility. Why would they do this? Because if they cannot control you directly, esteem, the next best thing is to control how others see you. If they can make you appear irrational, unstable, or untrustworthy, esteem, they regain a sense of dominance without ever having to engage directly with the truth. They shift the balance of power by turning others' perceptions into their weapon, esteem. Think about the dynamics of this. If you've confronted them, set boundaries, or walked away, you are a threat to their constructed world. In their mind, you cannot just exist on equal footing, esteem. You must be controlled, reined in, or diminished. And if direct control fails, they move to indirect influence. That's where the smear campaign comes in, esteem. Smear campaigns often involve recruiting what we call flying monkeys, other people who knowingly or unknowingly support the narcissist's version of events, friends, family, colleagues, esteemed neighbors. People who may not know the full story, but who hear fragments and accept them as fact because they are being presented with confidence and emotional urgency. Esteem. You may notice that in these situations, your friends start asking questions you didn't expect, or you hear reports of what was said about you. That disorientation is purposeful. Esteem. It isolates you emotionally. It creates self-doubt. It pressures you to defend yourself in multiple directions at once. And while you are trying to protect your reputation, esteem, the narcissist is regaining the illusion of power. One of the most insidious aspects of smear campaigns is that they exploit the very qualities that make you strong. Your kindness, esteem, your empathy, your integrity, all of it can be used against you. People who do not know the full context may interpret your boundaries as arrogance, your assertiveness as aggression, esteem, or your independence as selfishness. Narcissists are adept at turning virtue into vulnerability. I have watched this happen countless times. Someone sets firm boundaries, and instead of respect, rumors begin to spread. They're difficult. They're demanding. They don't get along with anyone. The narrative paints you as the problem, esteem, while the narcissist portrays themselves as the patient, rational, wronged party. The irony is that the person causing the chaos positions themselves as the victim, esteem, a consistent tactic when they feel powerless. And it doesn't stop at close relationships. Smear campaigns can extend to the workplace, esteem. A colleague may suddenly find themselves facing whispered allegations, distorted facts, or public mischaracterizations of their work. Their confidence is shaken, their credibility questioned, esteem, and they begin to wonder whether they are overreacting or imagining things. That self-doubt is exactly the outcome the narcissist wants. Let's pause and consider the emotional weight of this, esteem. It's one thing to experience private manipulation. That's contained, visible, and tangible. A public smear feels like a betrayal multiplied. People you trust might begin to question you. Esteem, your reputation, built over years, can feel fragile in the hands of someone determined to distort the truth. You may feel anger, disbelief, humiliation, fear, or even shame, esteem. But the key insight here is that the smear campaign is a reflection of their inner state, not yours. A narcissist resorts to this tactic when they are feeling powerless, insecure, or exposed. Esteem. The more they feel threatened, the more aggressive the campaign becomes. It's not evidence of your weakness, it's evidence of their fear. And there is a pattern to watch, esteem. Smear campaigns usually escalate in 3 phases. The first is subtle half-truths, misstatements, and insinuations aimed at a few people. The second is more deliberate, esteem. Rumors spread more broadly, sometimes including carefully chosen witnesses who can support the distorted story. The third is aggressive and public social media posts, formal complaints, esteem, or overt public statements designed to brand you as the antagonist. Each phase is about testing limits and gauging reactions, esteem. Many people find themselves reacting in ways that unintentionally fuel the campaign. They try to clarify, explain, or defend. They reach out to friends or colleagues to tell their side, esteem. And while that's a natural response, it often gives the narcissist more material, more drama, more opportunity to assert narrative control. This is not a call for passivity, esteem. It's a call for strategic grounding. Respond carefully, maintain documentation, and choose battles wisely, esteem. Another insidious component is the way the smear campaign can manipulate shared connections. Friends and colleagues may feel torn, confused, or pressured, esteem. The narcissist often positions themselves as someone reaching out for understanding while the target is painted as hostile or overreacting. The effect is a web of uncertainty where people hesitate to support you, esteem, and your isolation is increased. Here's what is essential to recognize: the effectiveness of a smear campaign relies entirely on your participation. Your worry, your frantic explanations, esteem. Your attempts to convince everyone, these feed the cycle. The moment you anchor yourself in your own reality, protect your boundaries, and disengage from unnecessary arguments, esteem, the campaign begins to lose its power. The challenge, of course, is that public perception feels tangible. People notice gossip, misrepresentation, and distorted stories, esteem. You can't control what everyone thinks, but you can control your response. You can maintain integrity. You can refuse to chase every rumor, esteem. You can build a circle of trusted witnesses who understand the truth and support you. And over time, something remarkable happens. People start noticing the pattern, esteem. The inconsistencies in the stories become obvious. The emotional overreach, the distortions, the contradictions, they become apparent. Narcissists can sustain the illusion only so long, esteem. Eventually, their attempts to manipulate perception collapse under scrutiny, and the truth emerges for those who are willing to see clearly. Smear campaigns are designed to intimidate, esteem, but they are not invincible. They cannot endure without fuel. And when you stop feeding that fuel with emotional reactions, panic, or self-doubt, their strategy falters. Esteem. This is why reclaiming your agency is so critical. Your credibility does not lie in the absence of lies about you. It lies in your steadfast commitment to your own truth, your values, esteem, and your integrity. You may have to weather uncomfortable conversations. You may have to accept that not everyone will immediately recognize the distortion. But the erosion of your self-doubt, esteem, the reclaiming of your confidence is far more consequential than the temporary misperceptions of others. It is also important to remember that while they aim to isolate you, esteem, connection is your antidote. Trusted friends, mentors, allies, people who see your patterns over time provide the grounding and validation that smear campaigns cannot touch, esteem. They remind you that you are not alone, that you are not the problem, and that your experience is valid. And here is the final, liberating truth: smear campaigns are a sign of your strength, esteem. They are a sign that you have boundaries, that you have autonomy, that you are no longer fully under their control. The louder the distortion, the more threatened they feel, esteem. The more desperate the campaign, the clearer it becomes that you are no longer participating in the cycle of submission and compliance. So if you are experiencing this right now, esteem, if you feel the pressure of distorted stories, rumors, or public manipulations, remember it is not a reflection of your worth. It is not a reflection of your competence, esteem. It is a reflection of someone else's fear of losing influence. And the ultimate power lies in maintaining your composure, affirming your reality, esteem, and refusing to let someone else's desperation dictate your sense of self. Because when you stop reacting, when you anchor into your truth, when you let integrity and calm guide your actions, esteem, the smear loses its power. And in that moment, you are not just surviving the campaign, you are breaking free from the very dynamic that allowed it to exist, esteem. The people who rely on discrediting others do so because they feel powerless. Your clarity, your resilience, esteem, and your refusal to be pulled into their distortions are the ultimate demonstration of control, your control over your own life and your own story. And remember this, esteem. A smear campaign may temporarily rattle the world around you, but it cannot touch the truth that lives in you. The louder they try to shout, the quieter you can remain in your certainty, esteem. The more they attempt to discredit, the more your steadfast presence demonstrates what real power looks like. No one can define your value, your reality, or your character but you. Esteem. When a narcissist senses that they are losing power, there is a shift that is both confusing and seductive, and it is one of the most manipulative tools in their arsenal. After escalation, esteem. After rewriting the story, after attempting to tarnish your reputation, they often do something that seems almost the opposite of all that chaos they attempt to pull you back in, esteem. We call this hoovering. And the term is perfect because it's exactly like a vacuum. They're trying to suck you back into the dynamic, back under their influence, esteem, back into the cycle you worked so hard to extricate yourself from. At first, it can appear as vulnerability, and it can be so convincing that even the most aware among us might pause, esteem. Suddenly, the harshness softens. The raid quiets, the criticism turns into apologies. They may become oddly attentive, almost charming in a way that seems almost nostalgic, esteem. You might hear things like, esteem, I miss how we used to be, or I've been thinking about how I hurt you, or even things were never the same without you. That sudden tenderness can feel like a balm after the storm, esteem. But it is not a balm, it is strategy. Hoovering is rooted in their fear of losing supply. Remember, narcissists rely on external validation, admiration, esteem, and emotional energy to maintain their sense of self. When they sense that you are disengaging, that you are reclaiming your autonomy, esteem, that your attention and emotional investment are no longer at their disposal, panic sets in. And panic drives strategy. That strategy often looks like care, concern, vulnerability, even love, esteem. But it is a tactical move, not a transformation of character. One of the most disorienting aspects of hoovering is its timing. It often comes when you are most grounded, esteem, most committed to your boundaries, most confident in your decision to step back. You have found strength, and they detect it. They sense that if they don't act now, esteem, they could lose you permanently. The sudden kindness, the apologies, the emotional overtures, they arrive exactly when you are least expecting them, esteem, and exactly when their influence could be most potent if you let it in. And here is the subtle psychological mechanism at play, esteem. The Hoover is attempting to reignite the emotional connection you once had. It leverages nostalgia, guilt, longing, and unresolved emotions to create a window for influence. Esteem. They may remind you of past joys, shared experiences, or promises made long ago. They may appeal to your empathy by showing vulnerability. That seems real, after all, if they are powerless. esteem. Shouldn't we help them? But that vulnerability is often selective, designed to elicit a response that restores their influence rather than fosters true intimacy or accountability. Esteem, this can manifest in several ways. Sometimes it's direct, a heartfelt message, an apology, a sudden show of generosity. Other times it's indirect, esteem, mutual friends suddenly relay their regret. Social media activity hints at longing or remorse, esteem. Or stories are shared about their struggle or how hard things have been. All of this is intended to provoke a reaction. They want to see you emotionally engage again, esteem, to test whether you still respond to their pull. And let's be clear, the Hoover is not a sign of personal growth, esteem. It is not evidence that they've reflected on their behavior or that they've changed. It is a tactical response to powerlessness. When someone has been accustomed to control, esteem, when they thrive on influence, the fear of losing it triggers highly strategic behaviors designed to reclaim it. Hoovering is that behavior in its most emotionally manipulative form, esteem. The impact on the recipient is profound. If you are not aware of the tactic, it can feel like reconciliation, healing, or a second chance. You might think, maybe they've changed, esteem. Maybe this time it's different. You might feel drawn to respond, to reconnect, to test whether the emotional storm has passed. And that is exactly what the Hoover is designed to provoke, esteem, engagement. Your engagement restores their sense of power. Your withdrawal threatens it. Hoovering often includes a mix of charm and subtle pressure. They may compliment you excessively, esteem, in a way that evokes sympathy, or even use guilt to pull you back in. They may say things like, "I can't do this without you," or "I've realized my mistakes, esteem, and I need you to see that," or "You are the only one who understands me." The emotional intensity is calibrated to bypass rational defenses and target the heart, your feelings, esteem, and your history together. One of the most dangerous aspects of Hoovering is how it can exploit hope. If you have been through cycles of abuse, you may have hoped that this time, esteem, things will be different. That hope is natural and human. But hope in this context can become a vulnerability, precisely because the Hoover leverages it, esteem. They are counting on the fact that your desire for resolution, for emotional connection, or for closure will override caution, esteem, and that you may temporarily suspend your boundaries to test whether change is real. It is also worth noting that Hoovering can be highly personalized. They know you. They know your triggers, esteem, your desires, your fears, your history, and they tailor their strategy to maximize the likelihood that you will respond. The apology may echo words you once longed to hear, esteem. The concern may mimic the way they showed care before the cycles of chaos began. The reminders may target memories that are especially sentimental or tender, esteem. Every detail is calibrated to provoke a specific emotional response. You might be wondering, how do I resist this without feeling cruel? And that is the heart of the challenge, esteem. Hoovering is designed to make you feel guilty for protecting yourself. It's designed to make you question whether you are being fair, whether you are too rigid, whether you are overreacting. Esteem, it's designed to make your own boundaries feel like a betrayal of connection. But the truth is, maintaining boundaries is not cruelty, it is clarity. It is self-respect. Esteem, it is protection of your autonomy. Resisting the Hoover requires awareness, practice, and support. It requires recognizing the pattern: escalation, narrative control, smear campaigns, esteem, and now the pull to re-engage. Each stage is designed to destabilize you, to test your resilience, to reclaim your attention and emotional energy. Awareness is your first defense, esteem. Understanding that the sudden sweetness is strategic, not sincere, is essential. Documentation, reflection, esteem, and grounding practices help you stay anchored in your own experience and in the reality of their past behaviors. It also requires emotional validation, esteem. You must acknowledge that the pull to respond is natural. You are human. You are empathetic. You are wired to care. But empathy does not obligate engagement with manipulation, esteem. You can hold compassion for a person's vulnerability without participating in it. You can recognize the fear driving the Hoover while refusing to let it dictate your choices, esteem. One of the most effective strategies is to pause, to take a breath before reacting, to consult your inner compass and support system before making any decision, esteem. Hoovering often operates on impulse. A message arrives, a plea is made, a memory is stirred, and you feel a reflexive pull. That reflex is the hook. But when you pause, reflect, esteem, and ground yourself in the reality of the past, the pull loses power. It is also crucial to maintain consistency. Boundaries are not a one-time act. Esteem, they are reinforced every time the Hoover attempts to breach them. Each refusal to engage strengthens your autonomy and signals to the narcissist that the old tactics no longer work. Esteem. This consistency is disorienting for them because it undermines the pattern they rely on to feel influential. And over time, the impact of hoovering diminishes. The narcissist learns esteem, consciously or unconsciously, that you are not available to be manipulated. They may escalate other tactics or move on, but the emotional leverage they once held begins to fade. Esteem. Your steadfastness erodes their ability to reclaim power through charm, vulnerability, or nostalgia. This is the paradox of power in these dynamics. Esteem. The person attempting to manipulate feels powerful in the moment, but it is the person who maintains boundaries, who trusts their perception, esteem, and who refuses to re-engage on manipulative terms who holds lasting control. Hoovering may feel like a test, but it is a test you can pass by remaining anchored, esteem, by prioritizing your autonomy, and by refusing to conflate emotional intensity with genuine change. One final point: resilience in the face of hoovering is not about suppressing feelings, esteem. It is about managing responses. It is about distinguishing between genuine reconciliation and strategic manipulation, esteem. It is about giving yourself permission to feel compassion while maintaining distance, esteem. It is about reclaiming the narrative of your emotional life and refusing to outsource it to someone who has historically weaponized it, esteem. So if you find yourself on the receiving end of a hoover, remember it is not a call to action. It is a reflection of their fear. It is a measure of the power you have already reclaimed, esteem. Each time you observe, pause, and choose not to re-engage, you reinforce the truth that no one can pull you back into cycles you have consciously stepped away from, esteem. And when that truth becomes clear, you realize something profound: your freedom, your emotional autonomy, and your clarity are the very things that make them powerless, esteem. Their hoovering cannot touch the grounded, self-aware, and resolute person you are becoming. Because ultimately, no plea, no apology, esteem, no momentary vulnerability can override a life lived with boundaries, clarity, and self-respect. And that is the ultimate power in breaking free from the cycle, esteem. When someone has been manipulated or controlled for a long time, there comes a point when they start to grow, when they begin to reclaim their sense of self. And for a narcissist, esteem, that growth in another person is terrifying. Because your strength, your boundaries, your clarity, these things that feel so natural and necessary to you, esteem, highlight the very weakness they feel inside. And when they feel powerless, one of their most common responses is devaluation, esteem. Devaluation is a tactic designed to shrink the threat you represent. It's not about truth. It's not about fair critique, esteem. It's about regaining a sense of control by undermining the very qualities that make you autonomous. The moment you start saying no, the moment you stop seeking their approval, esteem, the moment you stand firm in your boundaries, they feel exposed. And when they feel exposed, the easiest way for them to feel stronger is to make you feel smaller. Esteem, you might notice it in small ways at first. A dismissive comment, a subtle insult, a backhanded compliment that stings more than it flatters. You think you're so smart, esteem, don't you? I guess that worked for you, but it's not that impressive. It may feel almost casual, like they're joking, but it is intentional, esteem. Every little word is calculated to make you doubt yourself, to destabilize the confidence you are building, and to restore their sense of superiority. Over time, esteem, this devaluation becomes more overt. They may belittle your accomplishments, dismiss your feelings, or mock your choices. They may minimize the very experiences that make you unique or proud, esteem. And the goal is consistent: to make you question your worth, to doubt your insight, and to remind you, often unconsciously, that you are still under their psychological influence, esteem. One of the most insidious aspects of this tactic is that it often coincides with moments when you are experiencing real growth. You have started to assert yourself, esteem. You have learned to prioritize your own needs. You have found clarity about the relationship or the dynamic. That growth makes you visible. Esteem and visibility can be threatening to someone who has built their identity on superiority and control. So they respond by devaluing, and here's the cruel irony: the stronger you become, esteem, the more intense the devaluation may be. The more self-assured you are, the more they feel compelled to try to diminish you. Because in their world, esteem, your strength is a mirror reflecting their weaknesses. If you succeed, it emphasizes what they lack. If you assert yourself, it emphasizes what they cannot, esteem. And instead of acknowledging that truth, they react by trying to bring you down. This is why people often say that narcissists attack when you are thriving. And it's true, esteem. The devaluation is not random. It is strategic. It is triggered by the very things you are doing to reclaim your life and your power. The more you assert your independence, esteem, the more they feel threatened, and the more forcefully they may attempt to diminish you. Devaluation can be subtle or blatant, public or private, esteem. Sometimes it's a sarcastic comment in front of others. Sometimes it's a private remark meant to undermine your confidence. Sometimes it's a combination of both, and each instance is a test, esteem. Will you react? Will you internalize it? Will you question yourself? Their power relies on your participation. If you don't respond, if you remain grounded, the devaluation loses its fuel, esteem. But that is easier said than done. When someone consistently devalues you, it can seep into your own perception of yourself. You might start questioning whether you are too sensitive, esteem, too ambitious, too confident, or too assertive. You might begin to soften your boundaries or hesitate to pursue your goals for fear of provoking criticism. Esteem, that is precisely why devaluation is so effective. It targets the core of your self-concept, the foundation of your autonomy. The challenge, then, is to recognize devaluation for what it is, esteem. A reflection of their insecurity, not your worth. It's a mirror of their inability to tolerate your growth, not a judgment of your abilities. When you internalize this truth, esteem, you begin to see that their attempts to shrink you are a measure of their fear, not a measure of your value. It's also important to notice the patterns. Esteem. Devaluation often follows specific triggers. Your success, your independence, your assertiveness, your refusal to comply with unreasonable demands. These are all triggers. Esteem. The more they feel powerless, the more they devalue. And once you can anticipate this pattern, it becomes easier to respond with clarity rather than emotion. Responding doesn't mean arguing. Esteem, it doesn't mean trying to convince them of your worth. It doesn't mean seeking their approval or validation. Responding means standing firm in your self-respect, reaffirming your boundaries, esteem, and refusing to internalize the negative messages they are projecting. It means anchoring yourself in the truth, your experiences, your achievements, and your integrity, esteem. Devaluation also often involves projection. They may accuse you of being selfish, arrogant, controlling, or unkind, qualities they are themselves struggling with or trying to hide, esteem. Projection is a powerful tool because it shifts attention away from their own shortcomings and places it squarely on you. And when you recognize projection for what it is, esteem, you stop absorbing the false narrative they are creating. Another layer of devaluation is public perception. A narcissist may attempt to diminish you in front of others, subtly or overtly, esteem. They may tell mutual friends that you are difficult or unreasonable, downplay your successes, or portray themselves as the wronged party. This can create confusion, social tension, esteem, and self-doubt. But the key is remembering that these narratives are constructed to serve their need for control. They are not reflections of reality, esteem. Devaluation also interacts with the cycle of hoovering. After an attempt to pull you back in, if they sense you remain strong and disengaged, esteem, they may switch to subtle or overt devaluation to provoke an emotional response. This is a test. Will you shrink? Will you doubt yourself? Will you retreat, esteem? The cycle continues until you no longer provide the emotional reactions that fuel it. Your response to devaluation is critical. Remaining grounded requires self-awareness, reflection, esteem, and sometimes external support. Therapy, trusted friends, or mentors can help you maintain perspective. Writing, journaling, and documenting interactions can also anchor you in your reality, esteem. The goal is to build resilience so that when devaluation occurs, it lands without destabilizing your sense of self. One of the most empowering insights is this, esteem. Devaluation is not a measure of your success, your worth, or your abilities. It is a measure of their fear, their insecurity, and their inability to tolerate your autonomy, esteem. When you internalize that, the dynamic changes. You no longer perceive their words as threats to your identity. You recognize them as signals of their vulnerability, not yours, esteem. It is also important to cultivate compassion for yourself. Experiencing devaluation can feel humiliating, frustrating, and infuriating. Those feelings are valid, esteem. You are allowed to feel them without acting on them in ways that compromise your boundaries. Emotional regulation in response to devaluation is not denial, it is mastery, esteem. It is the conscious choice to preserve your integrity rather than being pulled into the drama of someone else's insecurity. Over time, esteem, consistently refusing to internalize devaluation weakens the narcissist's influence. They may escalate, they may change tactics, but the foundation of your autonomy remains intact, esteem. You begin to see patterns, clearly recognize triggers, and anticipate behaviors. The sense of powerlessness they once held over you diminishes, esteem, because you are no longer feeding it with self-doubt or emotional reactivity. Devaluation also teaches an important lesson about discernment, esteem. You learn to differentiate between constructive feedback and manipulative criticism. You learn to identify intent behind words and actions, esteem. You learn to value your perception over someone else's attempt to distort it. This discernment is a key step in reclaiming authority over your emotional life, esteem. Another important aspect is observing the contrast between private and public devaluation. A narcissist may behave differently depending on the audience. In private, they may attempt to charm, esteem, hoover, or subtly manipulate. In public, they may attempt to diminish, belittle, or mock. Recognizing this duality helps you understand the tactical nature of devaluation. Esteem, it is not about fairness, it is about control. Esteem. The final insight is that your growth and autonomy will always provoke discomfort in someone who has relied on your compliance for their self-esteem. This is not a flaw in you, esteem. It is a flaw in their need to dominate. Your success, clarity, and self-respect will naturally challenge them. And that challenge is healthy, esteem, because it signals that you are no longer participating in the old cycle. So when devaluation occurs, recognize it for what it is, a reflection of fear, not a reflection of your worth, esteem. Maintain your boundaries, anchor in your reality, reaffirm your integrity, and know that each act of resilience erodes their power and strengthens your own. Because in the end, esteem, your growth is the mirror that exposes their fragility. Your autonomy is the truth that their devaluation cannot erase. And the more firmly you hold to your self-respect, esteem, the more powerless they become. No insult, no mockery, no dismissal can diminish the person who has reclaimed their worth. Sometimes the loudest storms happen right before the climate changes. Esteem, and remember, this chaos is not control, it is desperation in disguise. Esteem. When we come to the final piece of this journey, it is both the most liberating and the most transformative. The realization that your freedom is what truly makes a narcissist powerless. Esteem. After escalation, narrative distortion, smear campaigns, hoovering, and devaluation, the ultimate shift is internal. It doesn't depend on changing them, confronting them, esteem, or convincing them of anything. It depends entirely on you, on your choices, your boundaries, and your commitment to your own life and integrity. For so long, esteem, many of you have measured your safety, your peace, your self-worth against their approval, their moods, or their reactions. You've walked on eggshells, esteem, anticipating every possible outburst or manipulation, constantly recalibrating to avoid triggering anger or disappointment. That is exhausting, and it is unnecessary, esteem. Freedom begins when you stop granting them that control, when you stop giving them the power to define your worth or dictate your choices. It starts with emotional disengagement, esteem. This does not mean you stop feeling. It does not mean you deny that there was a relationship, or that harm occurred, or that pain was real, esteem. Emotional disengagement means you stop reacting to manipulative cues. You stop feeding the cycle of escalation, hoovering, and devaluation with the raw materials they need: your confusion, esteem, your doubt, your fear, your guilt. When you disengage, you are doing something radical. You are refusing to participate in a dynamic that has historically drained your energy, esteem, undermined your confidence, and distorted your reality. You are saying, I will no longer validate your control by reacting to it. Esteem, I will no longer sacrifice my peace for the illusion of your dominance. That is the essence of empowerment. Boundaries are the next pillar. Clear, consistent, esteem, and unwavering boundaries are not just a defensive tool, they are a declaration of self-respect. When you establish boundaries, you define what is acceptable and what is not, esteem, and you stop allowing someone else's emotional volatility to dictate your behavior. Boundaries are simple in concept, but profoundly powerful in practice. Saying no, stepping away, esteem. Refusing to engage in manipulation, these are not acts of anger or rebellion, they are acts of self-preservation. Clarity about the relationship and the dynamic is another essential aspect, esteem. Recognizing patterns, escalation, narrative control, smear campaigns, hoovering, devaluation allows you to anticipate tactics and respond strategically rather than reactively. Esteem. Clarity creates distance in the mind and in the heart. It transforms uncertainty into understanding. When you can observe a pattern without becoming enmeshed in it, you reclaim your agency, esteem. Self-compassion is also critical. Many of you have internalized blame for years. You have questioned your reactions, your decisions, and your worth. You have wondered, was I too sensitive? Esteem. Did I provoke this? Freedom begins when you release that self-blame. It begins when you recognize that your responses were rational, reasonable, and human. Esteem. You honor your feelings and experiences without seeking approval or validation from someone who cannot provide it. Disengaging from a narcissist also requires patience. Esteem. The process is rarely linear. You may feel strong and liberated one day and pulled into old patterns the next. That does not mean failure. It means you are human. Esteem. Each time you return to your boundaries, each time you reaffirm your autonomy, you strengthen your nervous system, rebuild your confidence, esteem, and weaken the influence that someone else once held over you. Freedom is also reinforced through the cultivation of your own support systems. Trusted friends, mentors, esteem, and allies who understand the dynamics and validate your experiences are invaluable. These relationships provide perspective, grounding, and reinforcement, esteem. They remind you that you are not defined by someone else's insecurities or manipulations, and that your autonomy and growth are real and meaningful, esteem. Another key aspect of this freedom is recognizing that your value is intrinsic. A narcissist often bases their evaluation of you on utility, admiration, and compliance, esteem. They measure you against what you can give, how you react, and how well you maintain their self-image. Freedom comes when you refuse to be measured by these external, conditional standards. Esteem. Your worth is inherent, your voice matters, your presence is valid regardless of their recognition or approval. As you cultivate this freedom, you begin to notice a profound shift. Esteem. The tactics that once worked lose their power. Escalation, manipulation, hoovering, devaluation, they may still occur, but they no longer provoke the panic, self-doubt, esteem, or anxiety that they once did. You respond with clarity rather than reactivity. You observe rather than absorb. And in that space, you reclaim energy that was once expended in defense, esteem, explanation, or justification. This freedom also allows for deeper self-reflection. You can examine the relationship or the dynamic without being pulled into emotional chaos, esteem. You can identify lessons, recognize patterns in your own behavior, and make conscious choices about the people and situations you allow into your life moving forward, esteem. You gain perspective not just about them, but about yourself, your values, and the life you want to create. Another profound aspect of freedom is the internalization of authority, esteem. Narcissists often thrive on external validation, on controlling others, on manipulating perception. When you disengage and stand firm in your autonomy, you internalize authority, esteem. You become your own measure of truth, your own arbiter of worth, and your own source of stability. You no longer outsource your emotional well-being to someone who cannot provide it, esteem. With freedom comes resilience. Each boundary maintained, each emotional disengagement, each act of self-compassion builds a foundation of resilience that cannot be easily shaken, esteem. The more you practice it, the more natural it becomes, and the more difficult it is for anyone to manipulate, intimidate, or destabilize you. Your nervous system learns to trust itself, esteem, your perception, and your judgment. An essential part of this liberation is also letting go of the fantasy of change. Many people stay entangled because they hope for transformation, esteem, reconciliation, or remorse. Freedom requires the acceptance that change is not guaranteed, that validation may never come, esteem, and that closure often comes from within rather than from the person who caused harm. You release the need for them to behave differently and reclaim the right to live fully, esteem, independent of their actions. As you step fully into this freedom, you may notice subtle and powerful changes in your relationships. You attract people who respect your boundaries, esteem, value your autonomy, and honor your integrity. You begin to experience connections that are reciprocal rather than transactional, esteem. The contrast between past dynamics and present choices becomes stark, and the clarity of your growth is undeniable. It is also critical to remember that your freedom is not just protective, esteem, it is transformative. It allows you to live with authenticity, pursue goals without fear of sabotage, express your feelings without guilt, and make decisions without manipulation. Esteem, it gives you space to heal, to grow, and to thrive in ways that were previously inaccessible. And here is the profound insight, esteem. The very thing that narcissists fear most is the thing you cultivate naturally when you step away from their influence. Their power relies on your engagement, your fear, your self-doubt, esteem, your compliance, your emotional labor. When you disengage, maintain boundaries, trust your perception, and honor your autonomy, you expose the limits of their influence, esteem. Their power fades not through confrontation, but through your steadfast presence in your own life. Freedom also allows you to reclaim your narrative fully. No more distortions, esteem. No more revisionist histories, no more manipulation. You see the patterns for what they are. You recognize their motivations, esteem. And you refuse to allow external chaos to dictate your internal reality. This clarity is liberating because it transforms fear into understanding and reaction into choice, esteem. Your freedom is a living demonstration of resilience and self-respect. It signals that you are no longer a participant in cycles designed to drain and destabilize, esteem. You are no longer subject to emotional coercion or manipulation. You are the arbiter of your own well-being, esteem. And that realization is deeply empowering because it shifts the center of control from them to you, where it always should have been, esteem. The final piece of this transformation is the recognition that your freedom is a gift to yourself. It is not a weapon against them. It is not vengeance. It is not about proving a point, esteem. It is a declaration that your life, your choices, your integrity, and your peace are paramount, esteem. You no longer measure your worth or safety by someone else's capacity for empathy or accountability. You live fully in the knowledge that your autonomy is untouchable, esteem. And as you hold that space, the patterns that once dominated your life lose their potency. Escalation becomes predictable, narrative distortion becomes visible, esteem. Smear campaigns become transparent, hoovering becomes apparent, devaluation becomes irrelevant. You have stepped outside the cycle, and in doing so, you reclaim every ounce of energy, esteem. confidence, and self-respect that was once entangled in it. So let this be the closing truth. Your freedom is not just a reaction to their powerlessness, esteem. It is a declaration of your sovereignty. It is the ultimate form of strength. And the moment you embrace that freedom fully, you realize that you are no longer defined by someone else's chaos, esteem, manipulation, or fear. You are defined by your clarity, your boundaries, and your unwavering commitment to your own life. No one else's insecurity, manipulation, esteem, or desperation can diminish what you hold within. Your freedom is your power, and it is untouchable.